I need to be thoughtful about this topic given its sensitive nature. Let me write an introduction that handles the subject matter responsibly while maintaining audience engagement. Picture this: a crisp autumn morning at Atlanta International Airport. The early sunlight streams through the terminal windows as passengers hurriedly make their way to their gates. Among them is a distinguished gentleman in an impeccably tailored navy suit, his leather briefcase containing vital documents for an upcoming presentation. With over 2 decades of experience in pediatric surgery and countless lives saved, he never imagined he'd face what was about to unfold. As he approached the boarding counter, his first-class ticket clutched in hand, the atmosphere suddenly shifted. Despite his professional demeanor and credentials, what followed would leave fellow passengers speechless and spark a conversation that would ripple across social media within hours. "I'm sorry, sir, but there seems to be an issue with your boarding," the airline representative stated, her eyes darting nervously between her computer screen and his documentation. The surrounding passengers, initially absorbed in their own travel routines, began to take notice as the renowned doctor maintained his composure. What the airline staff didn't realize was that this man had just been honored at a prestigious medical conference, where his groundbreaking surgical techniques had earned him international acclaim. His presence was urgently needed at Children's Hospital in Boston, where a critical patient awaited his expertise. As tensions rose and murmurs spread through the gathering crowd, a young flight attendant recognized something familiar about the passenger's face. Her eyes widened as she reached for her phone, quickly pulling up an article that would transform this moment from an apparent case of discrimination into something that would leave everyone at Gate B7 questioning their own assumptions. The growing line of passengers behind him began recording the incident on their phones, unknowingly capturing a powerful story that would soon challenge perspectives across the nation. But what happened next would reveal an uncomfortable truth about prejudice in modern society and force everyone present to confront their own hidden biases. Standing there in the terminal, no one could have predicted how this situation would unfold or how it would spark a nationwide dialogue about prejudice, privilege, and the dangers of snap judgments. The doctor's identity was about to emerge, and with it, a revelation that would leave the airline scrambling to explain their actions. As the morning sun continued to climb higher over the airport, casting long shadows across the terminal floor, tension hung thick in the air. The next few minutes would not only change the course of everyone's day, but would also become a powerful reminder that appearances can be deceiving and excellence knows no color. Just as the situation seemed poised to escalate, a senior airline official rushed toward the gate. In his hand was a document that would expose an embarrassing oversight and transform this moment into a powerful lesson about assumptions, respect, and the ongoing struggle for equality in everyday situations. The story that was about to unfold would soon go viral, not just because of the initial controversy, but because of who this passenger truly was and the incredible impact he had made in the medical world. Little did the airline staff know, their actions that morning would shine a spotlight on a much larger issue, one that would resonate with millions around the globe. What happened next would not only change company policy, but would also serve as a wake-up call for an entire industry. As the truth about this passenger's identity emerged, everyone involved would be forced to confront an uncomfortable reality about how quick judgments can lead to life-altering mistakes. The senior airline official's face had turned pale as he studied the document in his trembling hands. The passenger before him wasn't just any doctor. He was one of the world's leading pediatric surgeons, whose innovative techniques had revolutionized children's heart surgery. His research had been featured in every major medical journal, and his methods were taught in medical schools worldwide. Just 3 days earlier, this same doctor had performed a groundbreaking surgery that made headlines across the medical community. A 5-year-old girl, given mere weeks to live, had been given a second chance at life through his extraordinary skill and dedication. The video of her parents tearfully embracing him had gone viral, though ironically, none of the airline staff had made the connection. The growing crowd at Gate B7 watched as the senior official engaged in a heated whisper with his colleagues. Phones continued recording, capturing every moment of what was quickly becoming a textbook example of unconscious bias in modern America. Among the onlookers was a retired civil rights attorney who recognized the gravity of the situation unfolding before her eyes. "This is precisely what I've been documenting for the past 30 years," she would later tell reporters. How many other brilliant professionals face these barriers simply because of snap judgments? Her presence would prove crucial in the events that followed, though at this moment she simply observed, taking careful mental notes of every detail. Meanwhile, the doctor maintained his dignified composure, something he'd learned to do throughout his distinguished career. His thoughts weren't on the humiliation he was enduring, but rather on his young patient in Boston. Every minute of delay could impact the complex procedure he was scheduled to perform the following morning. A young medical resident, who happened to be waiting for the same flight, couldn't contain herself any longer. "That's the surgeon who developed the minimally invasive technique that saved my little brother's life," she announced loudly, her voice cracking with emotion. Her words sent ripples through the crowd, transforming the atmosphere from tension to disbelief. The airline staff's demeanor shifted noticeably as whispers of the doctor's achievements spread through the terminal. The same representative who had initially denied him boarding was now frantically typing into her computer, her face flushed with embarrassment. But the damage had already been done, and the incident had exposed a deeper, more systemic issue that couldn't be undone with simple apologies. As the situation continued to unfold, more passengers began sharing their own stories of similar experiences. What had started as one man's ordeal was quickly becoming a powerful catalyst for a larger conversation about institutional bias and the subtle ways it manifests in everyday situations. The senior official, now sweating profusely, pulled out his phone and began making urgent calls to the airline's corporate headquarters. The doctor's credentials were impeccable, his reputation unimpeachable, and his contribution to medicine extraordinary. How had their system failed so spectacularly in recognizing one of the most respected physicians in the country? But there was more to this story than met the eye. As the airline scrambled to address the situation, information began emerging about a series of similar incidents at airports across the country. The doctor's experience, it seemed, was not an isolated case, but rather part of a larger pattern that was about to be exposed. The next few minutes would reveal shocking details about airline policies and training procedures that had somehow slipped through the cracks of corporate oversight. And as the truth began to surface, everyone present would become unwitting witnesses to a moment that would force an entire industry to confront its deepest flaws. Breaking news alerts began lighting up phones throughout the terminal as social media exploded with live updates from passengers. The airline's PR team, caught completely off guard, watched helplessly as the #RespectDoctors began trending nationwide. But what happened next would leave even the most seasoned corporate executives stunned. A group of medical professionals from various hospitals, who recognized the doctor from numerous medical conferences, had gathered near the gate. One by one, they began sharing stories of his extraordinary contributions to pediatric medicine, tales of seemingly impossible surgeries, of children given second chances at life, of revolutionary techniques that had changed the face of modern medicine, all because of the very man who now stood calmly at the center of this growing storm. The senior airline official, still clutching his phone, received a message that made him visibly pale. The doctor's young patient in Boston, whose surgery was scheduled for the following morning, was the granddaughter of one of the airline's board members. The coincidence was almost too much to bear, and the implications were devastating. Meanwhile, the retired civil rights attorney had been quietly documenting everything on her tablet. She'd handled similar cases before, but this one was different. The doctor's prominence in the medical field, combined with the public nature of the incident and the lives literally hanging in the balance, made this a potential watershed moment for corporate accountability. Security footage from the terminal would later reveal something even more troubling. The initial flagging of the doctor's ticket wasn't random at all. It was part of a pattern that had been occurring for months. The airline's new automated system, supposedly designed to enhance security, had been showing alarming signs of bias in its passenger screening protocols. As if the situation couldn't get more intense, a familiar face appeared in the crowd. A mother, holding the hand of a small child with a distinctive surgical scar, recognized the doctor immediately. Her son had been given mere months to live before this very surgeon performed what many had deemed impossible. Her emotional testimony, captured on dozens of phones, would soon become one of the most shared videos of the year. The doctor, still focused on his patient in Boston, checked his watch again. Every minute of delay meant precious time lost in preparation for tomorrow's critical procedure. His calm exterior belied the internal struggle between maintaining his professional dignity and speaking out against the injustice he was experiencing. The young flight attendant who at first recognized him was now frantically showing her colleagues article after article about the doctor's achievements. Medical journals, humanitarian awards, presidential commendations. The evidence of his excellence was overwhelming. How had their systems failed so spectacularly in recognizing not just his credentials, but his basic humanity? A tense phone call between the airline's corporate office and their legal team echoed through the terminal's security office. The implications of this incident were becoming clearer by the minute, and the potential fallout could reshape airline policies across the industry. But they had no idea that the biggest revelation was yet to come. As the crowd continued to grow, a junior IT employee, watching the scene unfold from behind her computer screen, noticed something in the airline system that would blow this situation wide open. Her discovery would not only explain how this egregious error occurred, but would expose a systemic flaw that had been hiding in plain sight for years. The IT employee's hands shook as she cross-referenced the data on her screen. The airline's new AI-powered security system, implemented just 6 months ago, had been quietly flagging certain passengers based on an algorithm that somehow incorporated decades-old, discredited profiling practices. But there was something even more disturbing. The system had been specifically ignoring verified medical credentials, a glitch that had affected hundreds of healthcare professionals across the country. Just as this revelation began making its way up the corporate chain, the terminal doors burst open. A group of medical students who had been attending a nearby conference recognized their mentor from across the room. These young doctors in training had studied his groundbreaking techniques, watched videos of his surgeries, and dreamed of following in his footsteps. Their presence added another layer of witnesses to the unfolding drama. The airline's senior official, now on a conference call with the board of directors, received news that made him freeze mid-sentence. The doctor wasn't just heading to Boston for any routine surgery. He was part of a prestigious international medical team assembled for a groundbreaking procedure that would be broadcast to teaching hospitals worldwide. The airline's actions weren't just delaying one surgery. They were potentially impacting medical education globally. Meanwhile, the civil rights attorney noticed something peculiar in the growing crowd. Among the onlookers was a familiar face, a former airline employee who had tried to blow the whistle on discriminatory practices months ago, only to be quietly dismissed. Their eyes met across the terminal, and a silent understanding passed between them. This wasn't just about one incident. It was about to become a story of systemic failure and corporate cover-up. The doctor's phone suddenly lit up with a video call from Boston Children's Hospital. The surgical team there had been waiting anxiously for updates, and the faces of concerned colleagues filled his screen. But it was the background activity that caught everyone's attention. News crews were already gathering outside the hospital, having caught wind of the developing situation. A senior pilot, watching from the cockpit during his pre-flight check, made a decision that would add yet another twist to the story. After reviewing the situation, he stepped out onto the jet bridge, his captain's stripes gleaming under the terminal lights. His next actions would not only challenge airline protocol, but would force a confrontation between corporate policy and human decency. The IT employee, still digging through the system's code, discovered something that made her gasp audibly. The security algorithm hadn't just been flagging passengers. It had been actively suppressing incident reports and complaints about similar situations. The digital paper trail led somewhere no one had expected, threatening to implicate individuals far beyond the airline industry. As tensions reached a boiling point, the young flight attendant who had first recognized the doctor received an urgent message on her phone. Security camera footage from another incident, eerily similar to this one, had just been leaked online. The timestamp showed it had happened just yesterday at another major airport, involving a different airline, but following the exact same pattern. The doctor, still maintaining his professional composure, finally spoke. His words, though quietly delivered, carried such weight that the entire terminal fell silent. But before he could finish his statement, another revelation emerged that would transform this incident from a viral moment into a landmark case studying corporate accountability and human rights. A senior executive from the airline's headquarters had just arrived at the terminal, clutching a folder of documents that would expose the true scope of what they were dealing with. But as he approached the gate, the expression on his face suggested he knew something that would change everything they thought they knew about this situation. The senior executive's folder contained something that would shake the airline industry to its core: internal memos revealing that multiple airlines had collectively invested in the same flawed AI security system. The doctor's experience wasn't just one airline's failing. It was the tip of an iceberg that threatened to expose widespread discriminatory practices across the entire aviation industry. As this revelation spread through the terminal, the pilot who had stepped out earlier made an unprecedented announcement. "I'm taking personal responsibility for this flight," he declared, his voice carrying across the now silent terminal. "This doctor has saved countless lives, including my own nephew's. Today, we're not just following protocols. We're following our conscience." The doctor's phone buzzed again, this time with a message that changed everything. The board member whose granddaughter awaited surgery in Boston had just called an emergency board meeting. Within minutes, the airline CEO was patched in via video conference, broadcasting directly to the terminal screens. What happened next would be replayed on news channels for weeks to come. In an unprecedented move, the CEO acknowledged not just this incident, but years of systemic issues. As he spoke, the young IT employee's findings were being rapidly shared across all major news networks. The flawed algorithm hadn't just affected medical professionals. It had impacted thousands of passengers across various professions, creating a pattern of discrimination that could no longer be ignored. But the most powerful moment came when the mother who had recognized the doctor earlier stepped forward again. This time, she wasn't alone. Through social media, other parents whose children had been saved by the doctor had been following the events. They had rushed to the airport, creating a spontaneous gathering of families whose lives had been touched by his skill and dedication. The civil rights attorney, who had been documenting everything, suddenly received a notification that would change the course of this entire situation. Similar incidents had been reported at airports across the country, all within the past hour. The doctor's experience had triggered a nationwide response, with medical professionals everywhere beginning to share their own stories. The senior airline official, still reeling from each new development, watched as the doctor finally opened his briefcase. Inside wasn't just medical documentation. There was also a draft of a new hospital diversity initiative he had been developing, aimed at addressing systemic bias in healthcare institutions. The irony of the situation was not lost on anyone present. Just then, the pilot emerged again, this time with the entire flight crew behind him. They had made a decision that would set a new precedent in airline history. But before they could announce it, breaking news flashed across the terminal screens. Other airlines were already beginning to suspend use of the controversial security system, creating a domino effect across the industry. The doctor, who had maintained his dignity throughout the ordeal, finally allowed himself a small smile. Not because of the vindication, but because his phone had just lit up with news from Boston. His patient's surgery had been rescheduled to accommodate the delay, and the hospital board had unanimously approved his proposal for systemic changes in medical institutions. As the terminal erupted in applause, the young flight attendant who at first recognized him received one final alert on her phone. The airline's board of directors had just announced a complete overhaul of their systems and policies, with the doctor himself being invited to help reshape their approach to passenger screening. But even this wasn't the final twist in this remarkable story. As he finally boarded the plane, a document in the executive's folder revealed something that would ensure this incident would be remembered as the catalyst for change across not just aviation, but all of corporate America. As the plane finally took off toward Boston, the document in the executive's folder made its way to the press. It revealed that the airline's board had already been secretly working on a complete overhaul of their systems, prompted by an internal study that had shown alarming patterns of bias. The doctor's incident hadn't just exposed the problem. It had accelerated a change that was desperately needed across the entire industry. Within weeks, The impact of that day rippled far beyond the aviation sector. Major corporations began reviewing their own AI systems for similar biases, leading to a nationwide conversation about technology and human dignity. The doctor's calm composure in the face of discrimination had become a powerful symbol of grace under pressure, inspiring others to speak up about their own experiences. The young employee who discovered the system's flaws wasn't forgotten either. She was promoted to lead a new department focused on ethical AI implementation, ensuring that future security systems would protect both safety and dignity. Her team's first project? Collaborating with medical professionals to create guidelines for treating essential workers with the respect they deserve. The civil rights attorney's documentation proved invaluable. Her careful observations that day became part of a landmark case study used in law schools nationwide, teaching future lawyers about the intersection of technology, civil rights, and corporate responsibility. The former airline employee who had tried to blow the whistle was reinstated with full benefits and appointed to a new oversight committee. The pilot and flight crews stand for principle over protocol inspired a movement within the airline industry. Their actions led to the creation of a common sense and dignity clause in airline procedures, giving staff the authority to override automated systems when human judgment and decency called for it. Back in Boston, the doctor's surgery was a success. The board member's granddaughter made a full recovery, but more importantly, the hospital's new diversity initiative, born from that chaotic day at the airport, was implemented across their entire healthcare network. Medical professionals from all backgrounds finally had a stronger voice in shaping institutional policies. The mother and child who had recognized him that day started a foundation, connecting medical professionals who had faced discrimination with legal resources and support networks. Their organization quickly grew, turning a moment of injustice into a movement for lasting change. Perhaps most significantly, the young medical students who had witnessed everything that day carried the lesson forward into their own careers. They understood that excellence knows no color, and that standing up for dignity is as important as any medical procedure they would perform. 1 year later, the doctor returned to that same airport. This time, he was there to cut the ribbon on a new training center, one dedicated to teaching airline staff about unconscious bias and human dignity. The automated security system had been replaced with one that emphasized human judgment and respect, while still maintaining the highest safety standards. The young flight attendant who first recognized him that day was now running the training program, sharing her experience with new employees and teaching them that true security comes not just from systems and protocols, but from treating every passenger with respect and dignity. As our story draws to a close, it's worth noting that sometimes the most powerful changes come from moments of challenge. What began as a disturbing incident of discrimination became a catalyst for transformation across multiple industries. The doctor's quiet dignity, combined with the courage of those who stood up for what was right, reminded everyone that real change happens when people choose to do what's right, even when systems tell them otherwise. And that document in the executive's folder, it became known as the Dignity Directive, a blueprint for corporate responsibility that continues to influence company policies across America to this day. Because in the end, this wasn't just a story about one man's experience at an airport. It was about how a single moment of injustice, met with grace and courage, can transform an entire society's understanding of respect, dignity, and human potential.